Hey guys, welcome to SimRacingPaddock. I'm William Mars, and this is my review on the Heusinkveld Engineering SimRig GT cockpit. This is the first ever aluminum extrusion based cockpit I've ever owned, and I'll just go out and say it. I freaking love this cockpit. However, for a lot of sim racers, I might not recommend this as the ideal choice. Why? Watch on and find out. So for those of you who don't know, aluminum profiling is a very modular building material that is used for all sorts of building applications. Very lightweight, but also very sturdy. This cockpit uses 15 series metric aluminum profiling, and it is pretty remarkable. The design for this reminds me quite a bit of the SimLab P1 cockpit. However, this is a slightly more compact footprint. This is slightly longer than the P1, but it's a good 15 centimeters thinner. Once you factor in the monitors, your effective space is going to be slightly similar, but your footprint is going to be smaller, which is pretty nice, especially for people using it for press events, which I'll talk about later in this review. Building this cockpit is a pretty simple affair if you know what you're doing with 80/20. However, this was my first build, so it took me roughly 4.5 hours to build. If you have 4 hours to kill, want to check it out, go see that link up there and you can watch it. But this, I think, could have gone a lot faster if A, I knew what I was doing, and B, maybe if I had a friend. And I'd recommend building this with a friend. And that might also keep you from doing something monumentally stupid, like almost knocking your half-built cockpit off a table. Sorry about that. I'm going to use... That could have been very bad. One thing I will give Heusinkveld props on is the instruction manual. You can tell they put a lot of effort into it and was very well written. That is great, especially compared to a lot of the other cockpits, and those instructions were nightmares on other cockpits. So it was nice to see a very strong, cohesive instruction manual sent to me, and it really never got me lost. I always knew what I was doing, and that was a really good feeling building the cockpit. One other thing I want to note is that this cockpit does not come with a seat. I ended up salvaging the seat from my Track Racer RS6 cockpit, and that worked near perfectly. The way this works is Heusinkveld supplied some custom brackets, and you're able to use those to mount a bucket seat that has side holes. Note that the side holes have to be a maximum of 435 millimeters to work. You can use a thinner seat, but it will need spacers. They recommend the Cobra Imolas seat, and that looks to be a good one. However, you can use any bucket seat you want, granted that it meets the size requirement. One other thing I want to mention is that if you're planning on using this cockpit with multiple people, you might want to actually swap out those brackets for rails. The brackets that come with the cockpit do a great job of keeping the seat secure, but it is a little tricky moving it back and forth. You basically have to loosen 8 thumb screws and then move the seat forward and backward, but it's not really ideal. I'd recommend rails if you're using it for events or things that are gonna have you moving the seat back and forward. Funnily enough, the pedal mount uses a similar method to move it back and forth, and that was a lot smoother in my opinion, so yeah. One other thing I want to mention is that the cockpit does include a triple monitor mount. This utilizes their own custom aluminum water cut bracket as well, and it's very sturdy for a cockpit that has the monitor mount attached to it. There was minimal wiggle, minimal motion, which is awesome. So my first time driving this cockpit, my thoughts went to, wow. I have to retrain my brain. So what I mean by that is when you're driving with the lower end cockpits, you learn to compensate for the flaws. So for example, with my GT Omega, I learned to compensate because when I hit the brake hard, I know the front's gonna flex. And when I get into this Heusinkveld, there's no pedal flex whatsoever. The pedal plate is rock solid. So you literally have to retrain your brain not to compensate for that imperfection in the flex. So after about maybe a half hour or so, I gained so much confidence in my braking it wasn't even funny. Also, the same thing goes for the wheel mount. The wheel mount is incredibly well built, incredibly sturdy. I basically felt no flex whatsoever in it. I tested it out with the Fanatec Club Sport wheel version 2.5, as well as the large Mige-based open sim wheel from SimRacingBay. And even with the motor cranked up to 70% strength, most of the flex I felt was negligible. It was actually significantly less flex than I felt driving the $50,000 CXC Motion Pro 2 cockpit. So this is an incredibly sturdy cockpit. One thing you'll likely notice is I didn't talk about Thrustmaster with this cockpit. And the reason is one of my main gripes. Very, very limited compatibility with sim racing hardware. The wheel mount utilizes front mounting holes, which basically restricts your compatibility to 4 options. Fanatec's CSL and Club Sport wheel, the Open Sim wheel based on the Mige motors, the Sim Steering 2, and the AccuForce. Those 4 are the only models that you can use on the wheel mount. Pedals, shifter, and handbrake are also very, very limited. Just Heusinkveld. That's it. The pedals, you have the choice between the Pros and the Ultimates. Shifter and handbrake, just one option. And it's irritating, but at the same time, that makes me very happy 80/20 is very modular. I went to my local Granger, spent about 50 bucks, got a 2-meter long beam of 80/20 profiling. I went to my dad's work. He cut it for me. Thank you, Dad. And I was able to make my own shifter mount. And I'm going to use the rest of the components to make a button box mount and a butt kicker mount. But with that being said, that's still $50 extra. And if you're looking to add your own wheel mount or new pedal mount, you're going to be looking at maybe close to $100 extra. And that's factoring into what's going to be my second gripe with this cockpit, the price. So I live in California, so that's slightly higher shipping prices, but MSRP for this cockpit is about 1,120 euros. That translates into roughly 1,400 US dollars. Add in about $300-400 shipping, that is $1,800. And that's for a cockpit without a seat. Add in $200 for a seat, and you're looking at $2,000. I'll admit, it's overpriced. I think the SimLab P1 is technically almost identical. It has more compatibility options, and you can get it for about 600 euros. So that's roughly half the price once you add a seat. That, I think, is a better value. And that's one of the main gripes I have with this cockpit. You're paying a buttload for limited compatibility. And I think there is a reason for that. So I was able to talk to one of my friends who got to tour Heusinkveld, and he did this great video. And I'm going to provide a link to that up there or down in the description. And that is going to talk about the mentality of this cockpit. And that is the fact that I don't think this was really intended for consumer application. A lot of Heusinkveld products are marketed as professional solutions that happen to be for sale to the general public. This cockpit, I think, is a bigger example of that. What I heard was that this cockpit was actually intended to be a one-off at first. A professional driver came to them and said, "Hey, I want you to build a cockpit for me and kit it out with all your gear." So they did that, and then they realized, hey, we can build more of these. So they did, and they started selling it. So I think this is not as much marketed towards the community, but more towards the corporate solution. And they're hoping that the people in the Heusinkveld ecosystem are going to get the Cockpit too. They're going to keep a professional relationship with Heusinkveld. So, for example, at SimRacing Expo, there were no less than 4 Heusinkveld cockpits there. They had 2 over at the Automobilista / Heusinkveld booth. They had 2 at the R Factor 2 booth. So it's that idea that is for the corporate solution and keeping that relationship with Heusinkveld. And I think that's the mentality behind the Cockpit. So realistically, I think for the consumer, I'd say that SimLab or JCL Sim Racing will give you a lot more bang for your buck. However, this doesn't take away from the fact that this is my favorite cockpit as of right now. This is the cockpit that I'm going to be using for my test drives, for my fun drives, for a lot of my live streams and testing like that. However, I can't with a good conscience recommend it to the community because it's just simply too high a price and too limited compatibility. So with that being said, let's get on to my pros and cons and final thoughts. As always, let's start with the pros. Incredibly sturdy cockpit with minimal flex. The higher seating position makes it easier to get in and out of. Fairly lightweight, easy to move around. Modular design, easy to add and remove parts. Extremely customizable, able to fine-tune it to match your perfect seating position. Includes the triple monitor mount. Smaller footprint than other cockpits. And now let's get on to the cons. Expensive. Limited hardware compatibility. A little difficult to move the seat back and forward. Under heavy driving, there is a little monitor movement. So let's get on to my final thoughts. Do I recommend the Heusinkveld Engineering SimRig GT? I alluded to this multiple times, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with a no. Don't get me wrong, this is my favorite cockpit. This is truly an incredible cockpit. But I just can't justify a $2,000 price tag for the limited compatibility, and yeah. Expect me to be driving this cockpit a lot more, and I also should be testing out other 80/20 based cockpits in the near future. I'm in talks with a couple companies, and I'll try to do some shootouts and see if it's the material or the design. So, with that being said, thank you for watching my review, and if you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe buttons down below and help keep us on track. For the Sim Racing Paddock, I'm William Marsh, and you have a great rest of your day.